Hi friends, Kathryn Korostoff here from Research Rockstar, and today I'd like to talk about a really important topic, something that's relevant to anybody who does professional quality market research, and that has to do with documenting your sampling plan. Now, for those of you who may be newer on your market research career journey, and maybe the phrase sampling is still a little bit new to you, sampling is really just about defining who we are going to have participate in our research. That is, if we're doing a study about customer attitudes or behaviors, there's some population of interest. Maybe it's current customers, maybe it's potential customers, maybe it's people who buy certain types of products. There are many ways to define populations of interest. Sampling is really about the decisions we make so that we can be sure that when we collect our data, that we're collecting data from people who truly do represent the population of interest. It's a classic case of garbage in, garbage out. For example, if you're doing a survey that you're hoping is going to give you reliable data about customer attitudes about frozen pizza brands, well, you don't want it to do a survey with people who never buy or never will buy frozen pizza, right? That would be a sampling problem. So you really want to make sure that when you're doing research that you have made some very careful decisions about how you're going to make sure that you're going to collect data from the right people so that they do truly represent the population of interest. Now, you can make these decisions. Of course, you have to make those decisions if you're doing research, but the topic here that I really want to talk about is how we document those decisions. And it really is an important thing to document these things. But first, let me just ask you a question. What types of market research projects involve sampling? What do you think? Well, the answer might surprise you. All of them. So whether you're doing surveys, focus groups, in-depth interviews, webcam interviews, online communities, ethnographic research, etc., etc. If you're doing any kind of primary research, you are going to be making decisions about sampling. And so the decisions can be rather complex. And while some projects are going to be more rigorous in terms of their sampling plans than others, all research studies will have some decisions about who you're going to have participate in the research. So that's what I want to make sure happens, right? We want to make sure that we make those decisions and then we document them. Because in professional research, you're going to have clients or stakeholders or colleagues who are going to be collaborating with you. Or even if they're not collaborating during the course of the research, they're going to be using the research at the end. And you don't want there to be any misunderstandings about who participated in the research. Let me give you, well, there are many reasons why that's true, but let me give you a really important one. Sometimes in market research, you get to the end of a research study and you have results that may be controversial. Maybe you are making conclusions that show that customers in the target market have attitudes or behaviors that the management of a particular brand didn't expect. Well, the first thing those executives tend to do is question whether or not the research was valid. And the first thing they do to question validity is they might say, I don't think you did the research with the right population. Because if you did the research with the right population, their attitudes would have been different, right? So clearly they have their biases. Well, it's our job as the researchers to make sure that we've been very unbiased in how we've done our sampling so that we really can say with a great deal of confidence that we have collected the data from the right people who truly do represent our population of interest. While their attitudes and behaviors may not be what we were hoping they were, this is the reality. And now we can make decisions, learn from this data, and go forward. So what do you document in a sampling plan? Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you the things that I like to see in a sampling plan. Now, you don't have to have all of these in every sampling plan. The truth is, in market research, some projects are more rigorous than others. And so in some cases, you're going to have all of the items I'm about to document in your sampling plan, but in some cases, a subset will do. So use your own judgment, but be aware that these are the components that you should be considering for professional research when you are actually creating that sampling plan document that you're going to share with clients or colleagues or stakeholders. First of all, open the sampling plan with a statement about what the sampling is for. What's the research methodology? Is the sampling for a survey, for focus groups, for in-depth interviews, for webcam interviews? What is it? So get that right at the start, because depending on what the methodology is, that does have implications for sampling in many cases. The next thing you want to talk about is how you're going to select people to participate in the research. So your participants are your sample, and you want to make sure that they are going to represent the target market. And typically this is going to involve specifying what screeners and quotas you're going to have for this specific project. So for example, if you are doing research for a brand of frozen pizzas that are sold in grocery stores, you might say, we want to make sure for this specific study that we're doing this research with people who buy frozen pizza at least once a month. And obviously there are a lot of variations, but just as a hypothetical example, or maybe they're doing a study to understand why people aren't buying frozen pizza, and they want to do a study of people who haven't bought frozen pizza for at least 6 months, right? So depending on what the objective is, they're going to have different screeners and different quotas. Probably the most common example of a quota is gender. In a lot of research studies, you will see that we specify a gender quota. Sometimes it's specified 50-50. There can be other variations. Why is that so important to specify and to document? If you don't specify gender, the brutal reality is you will end up with a lot of responses from females. Women just are more inclined to opt in to participate in research than men. And so you want to avoid the potential bias that could lead to. In our frozen pizza example, it might be unfortunate if you were to go out and do a survey of 500 people who buy frozen pizza and realize, oh, 90% of our data is from women. That could potentially bias the research. So we want to make sure that we have important demographic quotas, and gender is a very, very common example. We also want in our sampling plan to document how we're going to get to the sample. Where are we actually getting it from? Some people refer to this as the sampling frame. Some people refer to this more casually as the sample source. But the point is, you got to get these people from someplace. Now, maybe the frozen pizza company has a great in-house list of people who buy pizza. I don't know, maybe they have a pizza newsletter list or a pizza website where people have registered to get coupons. Well, that could be okay for certain types of projects. Maybe they're testing new pizza flavors with people who already love their brand. But in a lot of cases, we don't want to over-rely on customer lists for research because customer lists can be biasing. And also, sometimes we want to do research that is blind. That is, we don't want people to know who is sponsoring the research, again, in order to mitigate bias. So many of us market research mortals end up acquiring our sample from sample sources such as online panel providers. Some folks will also partner with professional associations. If you're doing B2B research, you might have access to membership lists. Some folks will also get lists or list access from magazine subscriber lists and so forth if they have special niche populations. But you have to say what that sample source is and document what that sample source is. And in some cases, there may be more than one sample source. The next thing you want to document is what incentives you're going to use. It is conventional in research to pay people for the value of their time. Now, how you pay them is going to vary quite a lot. If you're working with an online panel provider, they take care of that. Many of them have point systems so that people who participate in research through their panel earn points over time that they can periodically exchange for gift cards or magazine subscriptions and other things. If you're doing your own research, it's very common to do e-gift certificates or e-gift cards. Amazon e-gift cards are a popular choice, but you do typically want to compensate people to thank them for the value of their time. There are exceptions. You might be in a business where that's considered unethical or where it's actually banned. So if you're not sure, please do talk to your legal department about that. So that does vary by industry. The other thing to know is that there can be cases where instead of it being a cash incentive, it could be another incentive. Very often, for example, in B2B research, you will see cash incentives, but you'll also see other types of incentives too. Again, depending on the topic of the research. For example, you might see cases where people say, hey, participate in our research and we'll give you a coupon for 50% off your next purchase or something like that. And so that can be really important. But in any case, what our goal here is to make sure that we've maximized our response rate by offering appropriate incentives. The other thing we want to document is anything that we know that might impact sample quality. No sample source is perfect. And so it can be very important to set expectations in the documentation just as a way to let people know, hey, we're doing our best. We've got the best sample sources that we have access to that we can acquire for this project, but there are some known issues. And that might be, well, for example, in B2B research can be very difficult. Let's say you're doing research with IT managers who are responsible for network security. Well, let's say you found a sample source for that looks really good, but maybe you're not sure what % of them have budget authority for network security. And that might be important to your project. So you might just want to document, we know that we've got a list of people who mostly should qualify on being responsible for network security at their organizations, but we're not sure what the incidence rate is. That is, what % of them will actually also have budget authority for network security purchases. We'll monitor that as we start our research and we'll update accordingly. So it's important when you know that there's some risk to document it. You don't want to tell somebody the day before you're done with data collection that you, surprise, weren't able to find enough people who have, in this case, budget authority. So you want to set those expectations, identify them up front. And frankly, that also gives you that opportunity to say, let's talk about some fallbacks. If we run into that issue, what are our fallback options? What are the things that we could do instead? So it's an important conversation to have. We also, of course, want to say how many people are going to participate in the research. What is our actual planned sample size? So we might say our planned sample size is N equals 500 or N equals 5,000, but you do want to document that. By the way, a little insider tip for those of you who may be newer to research, and for those of you who are watching on the video, you can see this on audio. I just want to point out that I actually have this stated as lowercase n equals x. So if you're doing a sample, so if you're doing a survey, you're doing in-depth interviews, it is lowercase n. If you use capital N is how we refer to the size of the population. So, for example, the size of the population of the United States or the size of the population of people who buy frozen pizza. That is capital N, but lowercase n is the subset. So in this case, we're going to take a subset of all the people who buy frozen pizza. Our subset is denoted by a lowercase n. We also will often in sampling plans want to say something about what the error range is expected to be. This will have to be finalized after we look at our data. And obviously this part only applies to survey research. It obviously will not apply to qualitative. But if you are doing survey research, you typically are going to have something in your sampling documentation that says, our goal for the margin of sampling error is plus or minus X% at the 95% confidence interval level, right? Just to sort of say, this is what we're planning for, this is what we're aiming for. And you will know that if you're doing survey research because that will have been a consideration as you decided what your sample size should be. So those things kind of go together. So what does this mean in terms of what it looks like? So for those of you on audio, I am showing a screenshot of a simple example of a sampling plan. And in this case, it's a sampling plan for a hypothetical study on daily vitamin users. The research is being done by XYZ Research Agency, and the client is Alpha Vitamin Labs. And we see that this is a sampling plan, that they're specifying that the geographic scope is US only, and that their total sample size will be N equals 4,000. And in the sampling plan, they've documented following XYZ's best practices for achieving an overall representation of the population, the sample frame from which research participants will be obtained will use 4 highly reputable online survey panels. Use of blended samples mitigates the bias associated with any single source. XYZ has used all 4 panels multiple times and finds them to be of superior quality compared to other known and tested panel providers. Right? Nice and clear. They're being very transparent about what the sampling frame is, what the sample source is. Then it goes on. The final sample will consist of base samples of 1,000 each for each of the following usage groups. Existing daily vitamin users, planned daily vitamin users, past daily vitamin users likely to buy daily vitamins again in the future, and past daily vitamin users unlikely to buy daily vitamins again. And then it goes on to specify some quotas for gender and for age ranges. And then it closes with, weighting will be used on the final sample to match to actual US population parameters from US Census data. Now again, the format that you use can be different, and the format that I've used personally can vary quite a bit depending, again, on how rigorous a particular study is. But this is a nice simple example that you can use to kind of get you started if you've never done this sort of thing before. And for Research Rockstar students, I want to point out that this is an excerpt from the sampling job aids that are included both in Market Research 101 and also in the course Sampling Methods for Market Research. So you can access those from training.researchrockstar.com. I hope that this conversation was useful for everybody. If you have any questions or comments, please do let me know. And I do want to point out that this conversation is available both as a video conversation on YouTube and is also available as an audio-only version on Apple Podcasts. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe, leave us reviews. It helps us to spread the word about the whole series. Thanks, everybody.